Hey friends, so I am starting. I don't know how to do anything fancy on YouTube Hangouts or on the little Google Hangouts that most YouTube Hangouts come from. So I generally don't do a whole lot of really fancy stuff. I see that on YouTube's end, it just started. I'm doing that thing where I have my iPad off to the side. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about, asexuality and demisexuality. For those of you who don't know, I am asexual. I usually use the term demisexual because I feel like it more accurately identifies what I specifically am, but I am both ace and demi, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the distinction. Also, hey, Mark. Hey, fam. I'm glad that some folks are checking this out as it's happening. It was really last minute because tomorrow I'm going to be in a progressive secular space with the Progressive Secular Alliance talking about the abortion laws that have been going down in the United States. And then I'm going to be D&Ding it up with my friend Zal and with a whole bunch of other folks, which is what we usually do on Sunday nights. Super excited for that. But I'm going to start trying to see if I can do live streams on Saturdays. And today is just going to be casually chatting about asexuality. For those of you who have questions about asexuality, specifically as they apply to me, I would be thrilled to hear them because I am always curious as to what folks know and they don't know about asexuality. I feel like a whole bunch of folks don't know a whole lot about asexuality, which is part of the reason why I make the videos that I make, because even though I make my videos primarily for actual asexual folks, a lot of the stuff I talk about is more applicable to our allies and to partners who want to know more about us. The last video I made in the Asexual Clock series, specifically, I talked about something that I found really annoying, which is that a whole bunch of asexual activism online and a whole bunch of talking about asexuality isn't actually talking about asexuality. It's educating people as to different things that apply to people who may or may not be ace, talking about things like the distinction between libido and attraction, the different types of attractions, all of that fun stuff. And I see that a message got held for review. I'm gonna let it show because I know it's a joke and I think it's funny. But as an asexual person online, a lot of being online and a lot of being open and talking about this to me feels like I'm educating people and I'm helping people get to a decent starting point before I even talk about the unique and distinct struggles that come with being asexual. Also, Mark is just joking. So don't like leap on their skin or anything. I have no problem with people making jokes, although I know that might bother some people. That's fine. I generally won't censor people unless I feel like they're being malicious, and I know Mark, and I know they're not being malicious. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to be creating content that talks about asexuality, because if I had known more about asexuality when I was younger, it would have been easier for me to accept myself. Because you see, I guess I'll start this video off by talking a little bit about my journey through sexuality and all of that stuff and discovering what asexuality was for me and how I discovered that I was asexual. So my family is Hispanic and we're also Christian. I'm not Christian, but most of the people in my family are. And like most Hispanic Christians, we sort of assumed that the normalness was to be straight. We were a very heteronormative family, even though we had a few queer family members, but none of them were or are ace, at the very least. None of them who are public about it. I'm public with my family. My family knows that I'm asexual. They found out in a way that was very interesting. They found out because I came out as an asexual person after watching an episode of a TV show. And my whole life, I just sort of assumed I was straight. I really wanted to be straight. I think that was something that really negatively affected me. And part of the reason I really wanted to be straight, what didn't really have anything to do with my family. It had to do with the fact that I went to a Christian school. And Wow, that was a really strong reaction to just saying I went to a Christian school. Um, Also, hi, Wonder Lady. Hi, friends. I hope that you're all excited to be here. I know more and more folks are coming in. If you guys enjoy what you see here, if you guys want me to do more of these sorts of streams, like and share, tell your friends. I am almost at 400 subscribers, and I promise I'm not going to be one of those people who's like, subscribe to my channel. But honestly, it really helps if you guys subscribe to my channel. It honestly does. I do want to be able to monetize my content. I also want to have a big enough audience that when my videos talk about serious topics like this, that people can see them without me having to plug them everywhere. I sent my latest Asexuality O'Clock video because it talked about a whole bunch of really important stuff everywhere, and I made an unusually aggressive push because I don't really like sharing my own content. I don't feel comfortable marketing myself. So in that sense, I'm a very bad YouTuber. But it's really important to me that when I talk about these sorts of topics, people actually see them, because I'm willing for some of my videos to not get the views that some people might like for them to have. But when it comes to asexuality and when it comes to atheism, these are topics that I care very strongly about. And sharing them out and actually showing them to people is something that I work hard to do. And I'm very happy that my Asexuality O'Clock video did as well as it did. I'm also super happy that on Tuesday I'm going to be chatting with Bombshell Jen, who's another asexual person, and they're a super awesome content creator. They're not a YouTuber, but they're on Twitter a lot, and they're an artist. And I'm going to be sharing some more of their stuff, not in this video, but over the rest of the weekend. I'm also going to be sending them the questions I have for our interview later today. That's super exciting. I meant to send them on Thursday, but it's been a busy week. And I'm going to get back to my little journey towards how I figured out that I was asexual. I have always been asexual. There are some asexual folks who say that sexuality is a spectrum and that people can be on that spectrum at different points in their lives. And I noticed that with asexuals, we're a lot more accepting of this idea, because this is a pretty basic idea for a whole bunch of queer folks and in queer communities. But this is an idea that a lot of us don't really feel like people really adhere to. And at the very least with asexuals, the very least in the spaces that I've been in, we are kind of better at this. Some of us aren't, but a lot of us are. That, like, if you say that you're asexual for some part of your life and then you're not asexual another part of your life, that's something that less asexual people are going to be on your case about. But I've always been asexual. I just didn't know that, one, being asexual was an option. I also didn't know that, like, there were other people who identified with how I was feeling. And I've always been someone who's been, I guess, allo-romantic, if we're using the same sort of terminology for asexuals and aromantics, which means I was always interested in romantic relationships. And as a Hispanic person, the way that we're taught a lot of the things that we're taught is that generally we conflate romance and sexuality. And that's something that a lot of different cultures do. So this isn't an experience that's unique to us by any means. But because of that, I always just sort of assumed that I was like a late bloomer. I always just sort of assumed that at some point I would be more interested in sexuality and stuff than I was in romance. And I was interested in, like, sex as a concept, but I wasn't really interested in the act of having sex. And that's something that some other ace folks can relate to. Especially because most of us are raised in cultures where, even if they're not really sex positive, they're just like, yeah, you're going to have sex at some point, so you should just get used to it. And isn't asexual, bi, or just old-fashioned gay? No, it's not. I always think it's funny whenever people say that question. Asexuality, it's actually different from ace person to ace person, but generally what asexuality is it's a lack of sexual attraction. This isn't even really the same thing as a lack of sexual drive. And that's something that, like, confuses, that's something that really confuses a whole bunch of people, because there are ace people who experience desire to engage in some sort of sexual activity, but they don't direct that sexual drive. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's important that sexuality and sex education actually become better in this country. The Avon Wiki has an entry that talks about libido, and that talks about the terms sex drive versus sexual attraction. That's something that I recommend people check out. It is honestly difficult to define, and I think that is something that frustrates a lot of people. It's something that frustrates me as an asexual person, because I feel like people are going to worry that at some point the definition of asexuality is just going to be so watered down that anyone can use it. And personally, that's not really an issue. That's not something that I care about personally, but I can understand why that would frustrate some people. And I think it's really important that we, both in ace spaces and not in ace spaces, begin to have conversations about things like sex drive and sexual attraction. One of my next Asexuality O'Clock videos is actually going to talk about sexual attraction versus sexual drive. And it's also going to talk about the concept of an unaimed sort of sex drive, which is something that some asexuals, particularly asexuals who masturbate, have. And boy, let me tell you that this is a series that's probably never going to get monetized, because in Asexuality O'Clock, I am going to be talking about a range of different things, including stuff like this. I'm also going to be talking about ace adult content and people like me who are ace who write and draw and create things that are not safe for work. Because the reality is there are both sex workers and people who work in adult entertainment who are asexual. And that's something that doesn't make sense to non-ace people. It's something that doesn't even make sense to some ace folks. There are a handful of asexual voices who don't really understand, especially people who've always been aware of their asexuality, who don't understand any sort of thing about sexual libido or any sort of thing like that. And that's an understandable thing, especially if you were lucky enough to come from a home that was always sort of accepting of who you are. That wasn't really the case with me. My family never really had any particular beef with me being queer, but my family's attitudes on queerness have changed. And part of the reason my family's attitudes on queerness have changed, and I don't mean my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad were always surprisingly cool with me being queer, but I'm talking about like other family members. Other family members have become more accepting and more interested in topics related to queerness because I am a voice in my family and in my community. And I'm open and I'm honestly somewhat aggressive talking about queer topics, because the reality is if you come from a family that's uncomfortable with that sort of thing and you yourself are a member of that community and you are able to talk about those topics safely, there's a certain extent to which you probably should, because otherwise your family's views probably aren't going to change. And once again, not my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad were always fairly accepting of me as a queer person. That was surprisingly cool of them. I was always very happy to have that sort of safe space, and I was always really lucky. I've been really lucky because of my family in a range of different capacities. But now I'm going to start to get back into the story I was telling earlier about me as an asexual and me as a queer person. So I went to a Christian school that was very unaccepting of the gays, and I started to realize that I myself was probably one of the gays when my feelings didn't really start to match up with how they were describing. And this wasn't for a lack of trying. I was interested in, talking about sex and sexuality. I was interested in exploring my own sexuality. I was interested in finding romantic partners. I was very interested in finding romantic partners, and I tried, and it did not go well for me because I was a weird, nerdy kid who didn't really relate to a whole bunch of the other people I went to school with. So that was just a big oof for me. If I had a way to insert the Roblox death sound effect, I would, because that was the way I felt a lot of the time when I was a younger child. And it was not a fun experience. I went to the middle school. That was the Christian private school that I went to from 6th grade up until the end of 7th grade. And it was a very short period in my life, but it had a very long-lasting effect on me. It made me somewhat homophobic, although I wasn't one of those people who was like, the gays should be banned. That wasn't me, thankfully, but I was one of the people who felt like Christians were being persecuted and all that nonsense. And that's because the school I was at taught that. And my family didn't really know anything about this up until later. For a long time, I wanted to go back to that school. I thought that that school was like a great place to be, and objectively, in terms of just education without any of the cultural nonsense they were teaching, it was a better school than the middle schools that were public in the area that I lived in at the time. But it was bad for me. It was toxic. It made me into a toxic person. Fortunately, I was able to change. I was able to learn fairly quickly. By the time I was in the 9th grade, I had gotten over most of the homophobic stuff that they had taught me. English is my second language, guys. Cut me some slack. And after that, I started gradually growing as a person. I became more accepting of other people. And I also started to realize that me being queer wasn't really a big deal. I just didn't really understand how it was that I was queer. Because once again, I didn't know that asexuality was an option. I knew in the back of my mind that that probably was what I was, but I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate it. And this is part of the reason why it's really important that we actually have conversations about a range of different sexualities, not just being straight, bisexual, or gay. And it's really disappointing to me that in so much of the country and so much of the rest of the world, asexuality is still not seen as like either a real thing or a valid option. And it's really damaging for a whole bunch of people, because I have met friends who know that they themselves are some sort of ace. They identify somewhere along what's called the ace spectrum, because being asexual is a spectrum, and different asexuals experience asexuality differently. This is one of those things that makes it a little bit difficult to define asexuality in any concrete way. And it's part of the reason why in none of my videos have I ever really tried to make a single concrete definition of asexuality. And I probably won't do something like that. I know in my first video I talked about asexuality as a lack of sexual attraction, which is honestly like the only real way that it can be defined. But the problem is, even a lack of sexual attraction is a fairly relative term for a whole bunch of people, because a lack of sexual attraction for a lot of people doesn't actually mean like a complete absence, although there are absolutely those kinds of asexuals for whom it is a complete absence of sexual attraction. For a lot of people, like me as a demisexual person, it refers to an amount of sexual attraction that's considerably lower than, like, I guess, the cultural norm. And that's a really weird thing to try and think about in a sex-negative society. Most of my subscribers live in the United States, the overwhelming majority of us. And then the rest of us live in places like Honduras, Colombia, and Mexico. And that's because I create, Spanish language content. I talk about atheism in Spanish. I talk about political issues in Spanish from time to time. I need to start doing more Spanish videos, but Spanish, I always get nervous talking in Spanish, even though my Spanish is like not half bad. But all of us live in sex-negative societies. Now, the extent to which our societies are sex-negative differs from place to place, because the United States is less sex-negative than Honduras, but not considerably so. So, just cultural differences. And for me, I'm someone who can experience sex. So demisexuality, as opposed to asexuality, is a sort of moment for people who can experience sexuality, for people who can experience sexual attraction, wherein the extent to which you can be sexually attracted to someone depends on your emotional bonds with them. I'm not interested in debating the reality of this or not. So if you're one of those people who's like, oh, demisexuals don't exist, this isn't the place for you, that's fine. In that case, just think of me as an asexual person. I've only ever met one person in my entire life that I've actually experienced sexual attraction to. So, I mean, I'm gonna say that I'm asexual. That's the easiest term for me to use. I feel like it's a lot easier for me to use than to use demisexuality. And you can be both. Most demisexuals are both demi and asexual. So, but that is what it means for me. And the reason I agree, an atheistic snail, I really appreciate you. By the way, I cannot believe that I didn't make you a moderator before now. my bad, especially because you're one of the people I want to interview. But yeah, an atheistic snail is correct. That is just an absolutely real response to those people. People have come up to me, both in public and in private, and tried to debate me about the reality of my existence, which is weird. But whatever. I don't really feel like debating the reality of my existence with people. There are some people who do like to have those debates. I respect those people. I debate people about the reality of atheism and like the reality that atheists exist. Those are debates that I have. But when it comes to asexuality, I'm just like, you know what? There are voices that are way smarter than me on this issue. I can direct those people to those people, or I can be smart and not waste anyone else's time, and I can just let these trolls feel like they've won. That's fine, honestly. If you want to pretend I'm not real, I'm not going to blame you for that. Sometimes I feel like pretending I'm not real. So, but yeah, what happened with me as I got older was my understanding that I was queer grew more and more intense, and it became harder and harder to ignore. And by the time that I realized that I was asexual, I had only just really gained an understanding of what asexuality was. And it's because the person that I was dating at the time asked me if I was asexual. So I started doing some more research, and I realized that that was absolutely what I was, that there was no other word for me at the time. I wasn't aware that demisexuality was a thing. I wasn't aware that the ace spectrum was a thing that existed. But then when I realized that it was, I went and I started doing more research, and I found out that there is a spectrum, that there are things like gray demi folks, or not gray demi, gray ace folks, which is what I am. Gray ace is the term that refers to people who can experience some level of sexual attraction, some level of sexual drive. And it also can refer to even people who have never experienced sexual attraction to someone, but have experienced some level of sexual desire, which is not the same thing. Once again, I'm going to be doing a longer video on those topics where I talk about them, and I talk about them in an intelligent way. This is me doing something fairly unprepared, fairly unrehearsed, just sharing with y'all my story. And by the time I was in college and I realized that I was an asexual person, I had already gotten over the vast majority of the bigotries and the prejudices that going to the schools that taught me that being LGBT was bad. And I know I use like the gays as a shorthand, but that was basically the way the school taught it. The school didn't really care about bisexual folks aside from like, hey, if you're a bisexual person and you act on your bisexuality in a way that means that you have sex outside of wedlock, or you have sex with like multiple partners, or you date someone of the same gender, you're going to hell. Just standard Christian stuff. I'm not even going to say nonsense, although at the very least in the context of being queer, obviously, that is nonsense. It just is. It's really harmful. It turns a lot of people into self-hating LGBT folks, and that is something that's really dangerous. I know because I was one of those people. I was a self-hating queer person. I hurt a lot of queer friends before I realized that that stuff was bad and that those beliefs weren't reflective of reality. I was lucky enough to realize that those beliefs weren't reflective of reality before I realized that the rest of the religion wasn't reflective of reality. And I am very happy that I now know that those beliefs just are bad and that they don't reflect reality. I'm happy that that was a transformation I was able to experience. I'm happy that I have a family that made me feel safe in doing that. And that even though my family, who themselves are not non-believers and are not queer, we don't always agree on stuff like this. I am lucky that they accept me for the most part for who I am. And I'm lucky that I have a voice that I can use. And as someone who has a voice that I can use, it really is my responsibility to go out and to tell people that, hey, it's okay to be queer. It's okay to be any form of LGBTQ. It's okay to be who you are. And it's important that you love yourself. They're at the very least to some extent, because I've never been huge on like self-love, but I admire the person that I am now. And I think that if I can talk to my younger self and I can be like, hey, put aside your particular thoughts on my sexuality and on my religion. Do you respect my right to be myself? I think that the younger me would agree that I have the right to be myself and that they can disagree with me without hating me. And I think that those are important things. I think that those are things that a lot of queer people from evangelical homes or from Pentecostal homes or from Mormon or Catholic homes need to realize, because it is something that I desperately needed when I was younger. I really needed to realize that, like, you could be Christian and you could be queer, that you could love yourself, and that you could actually respect yourself without that clashing with your religious beliefs. And I think that there are a lot of people who are like that. There are a lot of queer people that I know of who are religious. There are a lot of queer Christians I know. I even know a few asexual Christians, and I have great respect for those people. I think that their voices are really important. I think that the work that they're doing to reform their communities and to sort of make where they come from better places and healthier places, I think that all of that's really important. And I think it's easy for us to forget about their work and forget about the importance of what they're doing. And it's tempting because it's really easy for us, even for me as someone who did a full transformation on religion and as someone who was once an anti-theist and is now no longer an anti-theist, but understands anti-theism and sympathizes with it. I think that these are all really important points of views to have. And I know that, like, if I had been a cherry picking Christian, I would have been a lot happier. I definitely would have had healthier mental health. I would have had better mental health because I had some mental health stuff going on when I was younger that I never really talked about. I'm probably going to make a video about that. But it was an important part of my life, and it was something that affected me negatively. I suffered from depression growing up, and it was something that I never really had addressed for a range of different reasons. But I also have a disorder that makes me feel like I'm dreaming sometimes. And I'm going to be doing a video on that in the near future. But that's something, hey, this is the first time I'm talking about this on a video. That's neat. I'm not going to go in super huge into those details, not because I want to preempt, not because I want to spoil any videos, but because I need to know more about it and how it affects who I am before I can create any sort of intelligent content on it. But there's a video by Dodie Clark who has the exact same mental disorder, and you guys can go and check that out. I'll probably come back in later and put that in a comment because that video is actually really cool. And it was one of the first times I heard that term, but I did get to go, I do have this disorder diagnosed. I'm not self-diagnosing, but yeah, that's just different sorts of stuff that affected me as someone who once hated who I am now and who I was then. Because the reality is, in my case, I've always been asexual. And I know some asexual folks who were not always asexual. They are perfectly valid. And I think it's important that I clarify that because I don't want people to think that I am using the fact that I've always been asexual as a sort of mark of prestige. It's not. I have friends, and not just people who were assaulted, although there are some asexual folks who started identifying as asexual after they were assaulted in some way, and that's also perfectly valid. I've seen people who sort of shame those people, and that's disgusting, and it's something that really needs to be worked on. And usually that's not something that happens in ace spaces, but ace spaces, like all other spaces, are imperfect. And sometimes the ways that we talk about things is imperfect too. And I'm happy to be here both showing off ace spaces to non-ace folks and trying to get them into those spaces, at the very least in an observatorial capacity, and also just trying to get ace folks out in other spaces. Because what I want to do with the live shows that I'm going to be doing in the future, where I'm going to be chatting with folks, and we're going to be doing an interview style in some cases, I want them to get more exposure, and I want other people to want to have them on their shows as well. Because I think it's really important that it's not just ace folks talking to other ace folks. I think that's more important than anything else, especially since the asexual community is still a fairly small community. Even the totality of us online, I think even all of us, there aren't that many of us that have particularly big platforms. There aren't that many of us that are particularly well known, and asexual characters don't really help. I'm thinking of characters like Sheldon Cooper, who I know has sex like later on in the Big Bang Theory, but he is one of the most frustrating atheistic characters and asexual characters I've ever seen. I actually really like the Big Bang Theory. I haven't followed it in the last few seasons, but I hate that character so much, y'all. And it's not Jim Parsons I hate. I think Jim Parsons is a wonderful actor who does the character the justice that the character deserves. I think the issue is that the character doesn't deserve justice, even though the identities that the character represents do deserve justice, and they deserve better than Sheldon. But yeah. Also, I'm reading the comments, so if you ever see me looking to the side, that's what I'm doing. I really appreciate the conversations y'all are having. I also think it's wild that there are apparently 12 people watching this video right now. There were 12. I have to like sometimes close the window and then reopen it to see the actual numbers. But one thing that I want to do in the near future, this might be the next Asexual O'Clock video I have that's not like a live stream. I want to talk about like asexual characters as they've been portrayed in the media, because that's something that obviously I feel very strongly about. And it's the same thing with like atheistic characters, because a lot of the same problems that plague atheistic characters also plague like asexual characters. And I don't understand why. Like Sheldon is definitely the biggest example of this, but he's far from the only example. And it's really weird to me to see these characters be portrayed so just strangely. Some of the big things I've seen with a lot of atheistic or secular characters, not just atheistic, is that they're like robotic, and that they have usually also that they have some sort of like mental disorder, or developmental disorder in some cases. And you know, that is actually, I know that like I have mental disorders, and I'm an atheist who's also asexual, but like that's not all of us, and it's really weird that so many of us are portrayed that way. I thought about doing another video today. I've been working on a video responding to Tucker Carlson's claims about homelessness, and like the sort of video representations of homelessness that Fox has created. And I'm not sure if I actually want to publish that video. Now that I've like explicitly stated what it is, although I talked about it on Twitter earlier, I probably will, but I might just scrap it and try it again, because I'm not exactly sure I'm super satisfied with it. But like that was one video that I was working on. I also thought about doing a video about like Girl Meets World and The Middle, both of which have atheistic characters, or actually more accurately, they both have secular characters. For those of you who don't know, Girl Meets World has an episode in season 2 called Girl Meets Belief, where they have conversations about religion in the classroom, which is always like a really dangerous thing to do. It's actually perfectly constitutional. But it's always like a risky thing to do, because a lot of the people who try to have those conversations have like an ulterior agenda. But that episode talked about religion. It actually talked about religion pretty in depth, unlike the episode of The Middle. But there's an episode in The Middle in the last season called The Christmas Miracle, where there's a conversation about religion, and it's revealed that one of the characters is secular / questioning. He is what's called a religious nun. And at the end, he does that thing that all characters in kid shows that talk about religion do, where like they go to church anyway, and like it just sort of gives the religious people like the win, that they sort of get to take the W. That was one of the other videos I was thinking of making this weekend, and then I ultimately realized that I didn't feel like I could do those videos justice today, and I'm gonna be doing stuff tomorrow, so I wanted to sit down and do something today. But I really enjoy being here and creating this sort of content, because often, a lot of the times when I talk about asexuality, especially in like an extended way, people will send me messages and they'll be like, hey, I know that I am some sort of ace. I have questions and I would like to know more. Or other ace folks get super excited and they're like sharing the content. And I really like that, because the reality is there aren't that many voices that talk about asexuality and that talk about what it's like being an asexual online. Because there's a very big difference between being like an asexual person who's open like in your public life outside of the internet. I feel like that's a lot easier for most people if you are safe. But then if you are an asexual content creator, yeah, it's not, I feel like it's not quite as fun as a lot of people would think it is, although it's super exciting to be able to create content that other people get excited about. I really love creating videos that I know people are going to want to see and that people are actually going to sit down and be like, cool, this is something that relates to me. And I think it's really exciting because I know that I wish that I had seen more asexual content. I'm creating the sort of content that like I wish that I saw, both as like a young queer person and now that I've been openly queer and like public about my queerness for several years. Earlier this year, I got to go to a presentation. I got to go to a conference, and I actually got to help arrange this conference with the American Humanist Association that was all about LGBT folks of color. I was the only white speaker there, and I was also the only asexual person who was speaking, especially speaking about asexuality. I was talking about asexuality and Latinidad, and it was a really exciting conference. Lots of people sent me messages about it. People were super excited. And that's honestly really incredible to me because I know that like I feel like I'm the young queer voice I would have wanted to see when I was just starting to learn about being queer, both in general and being asexual specifically. Because I also feel like those are two very different things. A lot of queer spaces are not friendly for asexual folks. And that's something that I'm going to be asking people who come on to the interview show about as well. I'm going to be asking them if they have experiences in queer spaces and how they've been treated in queer spaces. Because I have a lot of experience in both spaces. And let me tell you, there's a massive difference. I'm a member of a lot of different queer groups. I am queer, as we've repeatedly established. But one of the big things is that like there are people who question if asexuals are queer. And honestly, that's not, I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial until I explain it. I don't feel like there is, I don't think that that's something that super matters. The issue is that the way that I take this is that like queer people should be accepting of ace people regardless of whether or not they view ace people as queer or not. Now, what this actually means for a lot of queer people who aren't ace is that they think that they have permission to debate over whether or not we are queer. We are queer. That's the truth. That's the reality. I don't think it's something that people need to be debating, but there's some super edgy folks who think it's something worth debating, and it's super annoying. And it leads to a lot of gatekeeping. And yeah, Callie is right that there is an A in LGBTQIA, but for a lot of queer folks, that A might as well stand for ally. And I know that there are a lot of queer voices who are rightfully going to be like, A. The A stands for asexual. And they're right. But there are also a lot of voices in the queer community who are going to be like, but should it though? Because people think that it's worth debating our existence instead of standing in solidarity with us like we usually stand in solidarity with them. And that's not to say that there aren't some bad ace folks or some douchey ace folks who don't stand in solidarity with other, with other queer folks, because there definitely are bad ace folks who refuse to stand in solidarity. But in some cases, those people do that because they rightfully realize that lots of other queer folks haven't stood in solidarity with us. And that's a really frustrating thing to try and debate because it's so maddening, y'all. And it drives me up the wall. It drives me bananas because I know that like I was once homophobic because I hated myself and I was worried that I was gay. And that was like a legitimate fear for a good chunk of my life. not a good chunk of my life. That was like a legitimate fear for a few years, but it was a fear that a whole bunch of people sent my way. And it was a fear that people constantly reinforced because people thought that I was gay. And in fairness, I wasn't straight. So, I mean, the thing that they were worried about was correct, just not in the right way. They couldn't specifically identify what sort of not straight I was. And that's something that makes me laugh because I think about this. I'm still friends with some of the people who once asked me if I was gay. And usually people didn't ask me it in an accusatory way. They just sort of asked me it because they were curious, and it was a good faith curiosity. But that was something that was damaging to me. And I perpetuated toxic beliefs and behaviors. And I want to do my part, not only to atone for that, but also to help other people don't have to experience what I experienced, because what I experienced was really shitty, y'all. It sucked. I hated myself, and it made my life. It made me feel uncomfortable in my own body. And I don't know how to properly convey to people who never had to experience that just how destructive that can be, because that compounded with other things that were going on in my life, and it made it hard for me. And it made my life bad. And I'm glad that now I'm no longer that way. I'm glad that now I'm comfortable and I'm happy in my own skin. But it took me learning a whole lot. And I want to help other people, especially people from Latin America and people from the South, where the conditions that create this sort of self-hatred are a lot worse than they are in the rest of the Americas and in the rest of the United States. Like, it's really important that asexual voices, especially those of us who are safe and who are lucky enough to be able to be public, actually take the time to talk about this and to talk about these issues. I am so lucky, and it's part of the reason why I talk as aggressively as I do about these issues. Especially lately, I've been sort of reminding myself of all the different ways that I am lucky or privileged or whatever you want to call it. And I know some people get annoyed when they hear the word privilege. I probably will do a video about that because being privileged is a real concept and it's like a valid concept. But I can understand on some level why it is that people get annoyed with it. There's lots of nuance, guys, and nuance is hard to convey in a live stream. Also, I know that this video has been like somewhat serious, and I know that that's probably not what people are like super used to. A lot of my older videos were super serious, and there are definitely times when I want to get back into making those super serious videos, but I also like humor, and I like creating videos that people actually like want to watch. Creating stuff that people actually want to sit through is nice. And I feel like having this sort of conversation, even if it's just one person in front of this, I honestly, like, I low-key don't get how Twitch streamers do it, y'all. Because like being a Twitch streamer, especially if you were like starting off on Twitch and you're like just getting into it, so you like haven't started Twitch streaming with other friends, that takes like nerves of steel. People who don't live stream don't really understand that for a lot of people, it's really hard to like sit down in front of a camera and just sort of talk for a while. And I respect people who do that. I like doing that. People have told me that I'm okay at it. Some people have told me that like I'm good. Other people have told me that I'm not as good. That's fine. But yeah, I'm super lucky and I'm super happy to be creating content that other people can relate to. And I'm super happy to be creating a space on YouTube where at some point I'm going to feel comfortable talking about the unique struggles of asexual folks. Because the reality is, different queer folks experience different unique struggles. It's not a thing that like there's some people who use the term like oppression Olympics to sort of describe in social justice and social justice oriented circles the state of like someone being from a more marginalized space and community than someone else, and then like using that as like a sort of symbol of prestige and to add recognition to their voices. This isn't that. The reality is that gay people have their own unique set of struggles. Bisexual people have their own unique set of struggles. Transsexual people also have their own unique set of struggles, and so do gender non-binary people. Queer people who identify across a wide range of other spectrums, such as being pan or polysexual, experience their own unique set of struggles. And asexual folks also experience their own unique set of struggles. And it's important that we create spaces wherein all of these things can be talked about and all of the different unique struggles that we experience can be discussed intelligently, humanistically, and compassionately. And that's what I want to do with both the live streams and Asexual O'Clock. And I have no problem sort of setting the stage little by little, I guess sort of scaffolding, so to speak. But I do hope at some points that I am able to create videos that talk about the unique struggles that asexual folks go through. And the reality is there are different unique struggles that demisexual folks go through that asexual folks don't experience, and vice versa. And all of those things really matter. And I hope that I can do this topic justice. I feel like this early on in my YouTube career, I oftentimes don't, but I also create videos that are usually the introductions. And even though I haven't really actually gone back and like sort of built upon many of the videos I've made, with a handful of exceptions, including my favorite video series in Spanish that I've made, where I talk about like different things related to the secular world, different types of non-theism, for instance, and like humanism. Like in those videos, I've actually gone back and built upon earlier videos. And it's weird that like, even though earlier I was like, yeah, when I make videos in Spanish, I get kind of nervous, which is true. I do get kind of nervous when I make videos in Spanish. Like, it's interesting to me that those are the videos I've actually built upon the most. Do I Collins work? I don't know what Collins means in this context, Callan. I hope that you get back to me. Also, my girlfriend, significant other, is a pagan, and she and I are working on content. Not right now, but we're going to be working on some in the near future that talks about like paganism and stuff. She has a YouTube channel. Collins do not work at this time. I don't know. Patricia H. Collins, like the author? No, I haven't read Patricia H. Collins's work. I don't think so. That was a funny facial expression to make on camera. But yeah, I have been reading a lot more academic stuff. For people who don't know, I am a graduate student, and that is a unique form of living hell. Being a graduate student is not something I would recommend unless you either need a master's degree to get into your field in the first place, which a lot of fields like history do, or you just really, really want your master's degree. I'm the second camp. I just really, really want my master's degree. I've actually started doing work related to the things that I talk and write about. Also, I used to have a live stream series that I guess I technically still have that I used to talk about my field of study. I made peace and conflict studies videos on Mondays. And honestly, I'm low-key thinking of continuing to do that. If I made a video about that, I think it would be the first time that I made a video about that since I hit 300 subscribers. And now I'm not far from 400. Also, if you're new here and you want to hit that subscribe button, I definitely haven't done that every few minutes. I only did that once before. But if you're new here and you want to hit that subscribe button and help me hit 400 members of my fam squad / members of the Logical Listeners crew, that would be great. And part of the reason I say that is not just because I do want to have more subscribers for the sake of reaching more people, but because I eventually want to monetize my content. I want to be able to make a living doing the things that I love. And the things that I love are making videos and writing about stuff. And hitting 1,000 subscribers, that just helps. And I don't think there's anything wrong with really saying that. I understand why some people get frustrated with it. So I usually don't mention it in my videos. Yeah, I usually don't mention it in my videos. But if you want to help me out there, and if you're liking the stuff that I'm saying, if you've enjoyed me sharing this somewhat personal story with y'all, then yeah. Also, Callan and I do attend the same university. The only issue is I'm an online student and Callan isn't. So, but yeah. But also, hey folks, apparently some people here are new, and they showed up in there. Apparently at least one person Also, hi, A, Orion. Don't know how to say that last word. English is my second language. But hi, I hope you're having fun. Thanks for coming on to my asexual stream. I'm going to be doing more of these, both solo and with other people. I'm super excited for that. And yeah, Callan is true. Callan's telling the truth. We did have a class together. I wasn't always a digital student. I went to UNCG, which is our university. I went there like face to face and as like a normal student back when I was an undergraduate. And then my last semester was entirely online. And then when I went back for graduate school, which I started last summer, I became a digital only student. And then shortly after that, I moved. So yeah, real life hit me really hard, guys. It was not a fun experience. Also, let me know if Saturdays work for live streams because I really like doing live streams, even if it's just me. It probably won't always be just me who's here on Saturdays. I definitely will be doing live streams with other folks, and it won't always be about asexuality. But if Saturdays work for y'all, I'll do Saturdays. I did Mondays for my Peace and Conflict Studies live streams because that was the date that people most picked on a poll forever ago. Also, no, that wasn't a bit. Spanish is my first language. My family is Hispanic. I'm Puerto Rican, even though I know I don't look like what a lot of people think Puerto Ricans look like. I was raised in Latin America. Family's military. I was raised specifically, for anyone curious, in Honduras, Panama, and Colombia. So yeah, and cool. Also, yeah, I really like Saturdays. I won't do. If I do Saturdays, it probably will be around this time because for those of you who don't know, I am one of the voices who is portraying a character over in Alignment Unknown, which is Godless Cranium, Inane Dragon, Essence of Thought, Aided, Furball, who's a brand new YouTuber who I don't think has uploaded any videos yet, but is super cool, and Essence of Thought's partner, Utita, who also doesn't have a YouTube channel, and we play D&D every other Saturday. I also play D&D every Sunday with, among other people, Callan and Zal, who I always butcher their names, so I'm not going to try to. I also play with Chrissy, Mr. H Dark Beast, Milo, and Iseth Original. And I think that's all of us. It's a big crew of people over on Zal's channel. And Zal is a Twitch streamer who is also someone who's involved in a lot of conversations about secular stuff. I don't actually know if Zal is secular himself. I should probably ask him about that. But yeah, that's a really cool crew. I do a whole bunch of D&D. I'm probably going to start to wrap stuff up pretty soon, but I'm going to say this again. And whenever I do streams on Saturday, especially when I do streams about asexuality, I'm going to say this. If you are an asexual person, just know that regardless of whether or not you've always identified as asexual, you are an amazing person. Your asexuality doesn't define you, and it doesn't make you any more or any less than anyone else. A lot of people don't tell ace folks that, and sometimes it's something that we really need to hear. Because when I first started realizing that I was asexual, I started to wonder if I was broken. And that was something that really hurt me. And a lot of people made me feel like I was. And I am happy to be here to correct that narrative. And this is something that's a little bit emotional for me. So my eyes are starting to water up. But it's really important that asexual people know that they are not broken. Asexuality itself is not a sign of any health problems or any stuff like that. Now, low sexual desire can be. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it won't be, but asexuality isn't. And I wish more people said that because it's something that a lot of people need to hear. And I think it's something that people who aren't asexual but who might be asexual also need to hear. It's like, hey, if you aren't straight, that's okay. And if you are straight, that's also okay. Just be happy and be yourself and actually care about yourself, because that's something a lot of voices don't tell people. I am not Arrow. I wondered that from time to time, but I'm not Arrow. Yeah. Also, I hope that at some point in the future, as I do more asexuality stuff, I have arrow voices come on, because I do want people to learn about aromanticism as well. I also feel like the struggles that arrow people face are usually a lot worse than some of the struggles of asexual people. And a lot of people don't even know what arrow is, but arrow is aromantic. And it's important that those voices also be encouraged to speak up, and that people who have platforms like me amplify those voices whenever we can. So that's something that I am going to do. And that's something that I'm going to use my platform to do. Because, I'm a minority atheist, I'm a minority asexual, I'm just a minority. And I am happy to be here helping people out, helping people learn, helping people care about themselves. And if you are like someone who disagrees with me on some stuff, that's cool. I hope you feel welcome here too. I hope that you feel like this is a comfortable space for you, and that this is a space wherein, as long as your disagreements aren't about someone else's humanity, you can come on and you can chat with me. I want to be an open space. I want to create an open platform. I myself want to know different opinions. I want to hear from people who disagree with me, at the very least respectfully, and not just people who are like trolling or whatever. And I think it's really important that we have spaces where we can do that. I also think it's important that we have spaces wherein we feel validated and wherein we feel like we can be emotionally vulnerable. But I think it's important, and I think it's possible for some spaces to be both. And I hope that the cultures and the communities that I nurture can be both. I think it would be great if they could. I don't know if I'm the right voice to be talking about all this, but I'm a voice who's here. And I think that sometimes being a voice who's here and doing your best can matter just as much as being, I guess, the right voice, so to speak. I think that the conversations I'm going to be having here are important. I think that the voices I'm going to be bringing on here matter, even and especially when those are voices who disagree with me on some stuff. And I hope that I can learn from them. I hope that they can learn from me, because most of my videos are marked education. I don't know if that's the appropriate thing. I don't know if I would call anything I do educational, but I'm just a guy who's over here doing my best. Also, thank you, Wonder Lady, for talking about my Patreon, because you guys, I'm a freelance writer who is able to work as a substitute teacher, but who doesn't have like a stable job. So if you guys want to help me out on Patreon, that'd be great. Starting next month, I'm going to be doing more Patreon exclusive stuff. Not a whole lot, because I don't want my content to be behind like paywalls. I mostly want the content that I create to be stuff that people can find, and then I want to share like additional stuff for people who want to support me on Patreon. And I want to help people learn about things. And trying to help people learn about stuff is hard, guys. I didn't like, until I started doing somewhat more educational content, like my Spark Notes history series that I only recently started doing, I didn't realize just how hard it is to create like actual educational content. And people who do that on YouTube, like, they're badasses, and they should be respected and they should be worked with. And I hope to work with them. I hope to work with y'all. I hope that I can help connect people and can help people become friends, because that's honestly what I want to do as a humanist. I want to create positive, intelligent, compassionate spaces. I want to create spaces where people can be themselves and that they can be respected. And I am, doing my best. I don't know if I would say that my best is very good, but I am doing it. I think my best now is better than my best when I was younger. But I am now going to go ahead and sign off. I think that y'all are absolutely right. As I was about to end the stream, Callan starts talking about Nazi sacrificing. All right, guys, I am going to let y'all go. I really appreciate that so many people came here and chilled with me as I talked about, asexuality and stuff. I'm definitely going to start doing policy stuff again. The policy stuff that I usually did on Fridays. I've done a little bit more policy stuff since then. I've actually written about policies a lot more. But yeah, I am going to let you guys go. Just know that I like y'all very much. You're all beautiful people. And regardless of your sexualities, I hope that y'all can accept yourselves, love yourselves, and care about yourselves. Until then, peace.